So, thank you so much to everyone who is here today with us to talk about the the uh, the project that we have going on right now. So, welcome to the Society of Mississippi Archivists Virtual Table Talks. I'm Carrie Massley. This is actually our first season of Table Talks that has featured archivists and historians across the state of Mississippi that have come and have shared over the course of an hour the projects that they have going related to social justice themes. And this includes, anything that they've incorporated into their workspaces, to projects that they're working on, or even research. So before we start, I'm going to do a little housekeeping. We will have a brief Q&A session immediately following the presentation. I'm going to be monitoring those questions in the chat for our panelists. So please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box, because if you put them in the chat box, we may miss them. I will also add that one of our panelists, Chuck, he is having a little bit of difficulty on his end getting connected to audio and video. So we may be doing a little bit of improvising today. Mona may be doing a little bit more of the presenting than she originally thought she would, but I think that she'll do it justice for sure. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce our speaker. So here's Mona Vance-Ali from the Columbus-Lowndes Public Library's Local History Department. And hopefully Chuck Yarborough of the Mississippi School for Mathematics and Science, he is a history teacher there. Hopefully he will be joining us shortly. I'm going to see what I can do in the background while Mona's talking to help get him settled. So thank you so much for being here, Mona, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. I appreciate that. Since we are waiting on Chuck to kind of give his portion of today's talk, because he really is the expert on this particular project with the MSMS students, I did want to mention how we, as the archives at the public library, have sort of evolved and worked with the Mississippi School for Math and Science students on this project, as well as other projects in the past. So I got kind of lucky in that sense that when I started working at the Columbus-Lowndes Public Library System in 2005, Chuck had already been a part of a project called Tales from the Crypt, where high school juniors are researching individuals buried in one of our local cemeteries, Friendship Cemetery. And that project was already underway when I showed up. So one of the benefits is that I didn't have to like get it started from the ground up, but definitely we have expanded upon that project and included other projects, which is this project, the 8th of May, which is held in the African American cemetery, Sandfield Cemetery. So we work in a collaborative effort with MSMS, and so I have to just stress how important that collaboration is, having a teacher who is able to have the teacher's support as well as the school's support, which often is very, very difficult to do in this day and age, unfortunately. So because MSMS is sort of a unique situation, we are lucky enough that they are able to support projects like this and have the students actually leave campus and come to the archives. So we have, like I said, collaborated with them on these projects, and it helps us as an archives because often when we're deciding on projects, what kind of effort should be made towards either processing collections or getting grants even, often the MSMS students factor in to our thinking on what kind of projects we're going to do next. And I was going to touch a little bit on this later, but one example of that is the fact that we spent much of this summer digitizing materials that normally we would just have the students physically come to the archives and look at, but due to COVID restrictions, we again, focusing on the fact that we were, collaborating with MSMS, and we know that they're going to need these records. We were able to get some funds, kind of up the methods in which we digitize materials, and we were able to digitize over 6,000 images in roughly about 5 months. And that was quite a race. And it's really been super helpful. And you'll see in the slide presentation some examples of that and how that's been critical to having students have access to these records. So we really kind of bounce back and forth on what the program at MSMS is able to do and what we focus on here. So I'm just checking in with Carrie to see what the situation is with Chuck and if.
I'm not getting any feedback from him
Okay.
right now, so I'll let you know when he's back in.
Okay, no problem. So, like I mentioned, we collaborate with MSMS, but to kind of give you a little bit of idea of who we as an archives are, we have had materials at the library since 1973, but we really didn't have a fully functioning archives until 1991. And that was through a donation of the Snowden Foundation, which eventually became the Billups-Garth Foundation. And as we all know, with often with large donations, you get to name things. So we are the Billups-Garth Archives, and we are unique. One, that we have an archives of this magnitude in a public library setting, and two, that we have both local government records and manuscript collections. So we focus primarily on Lowndes County history. And that allows for a specialization during projects like the 8th of May. And we have roughly over 1,000 cubic feet of space of materials dating back to the 1810s. And because we also have those local government records, many include things like city minutes, which really help with projects like this, because often archives struggle with collecting African American history, or they simply don't have any, or they have only a little. And that's a whole nother topic as to why that is, but we also have kind of struggled with that. However, those local government records often will have African American history where you may not find it in any other records. So, for example, court records pertaining to cases pre-Civil War will include African Americans, unfortunately listed as property, but they are included. And so you can kind of delve into those records and find individuals who may not be recorded anywhere else. So when we were faced with the COVID situation, we knew that we were going to have to digitize records. And so we focused heavily on including as many city minutes as we could. And, each one of those may be 600 pages long, each ledger. So it's just a wealth of information about just the daily activities, but also information, especially just right after the Civil War during Reconstruction, pertaining to African Americans and things like that. So I encourage people to think of those records if they haven't considered those. But I know that many of the primary sources that Chuck has utilized for his projects include the digitized materials that we have done ourselves in-house, And we put those up on the Mississippi Digital Library, and that is hosted through the University of Southern Mississippi. They're gracious enough to host the visual side of things, so to speak, on their servers, and we are able to do much of the actual digitization and creation of what's called metadata. And then we basically ship it to them, and they're able to put it online. And it's a great way for researchers to go to one spot to see digital materials from all over the state, and not have to go to multiple institutions. So we've put much of those records there. Another resource that Chuck's students have used deals with chronicling America, and that's through the Library of Congress. And that project was in conjunction with the Mississippi Department of Archives and History over a 3-year period of time. But they were also able to digitize much of a lot of newspapers from around the state, and that includes Columbus from 1922 back. So the students are able, of course, because much of his era of focus is the era in which these newspapers are covering. Those have been really helpful because they're free and available online through the Library of Congress, and so they're searchable, and the students really, really enjoy those. But I hate to say, I don't, Chuck is really the expert on the project itself. You know, when the students come to use the archives, typically non-COVID situations, they're able to physically come here, and it can range from, say, 10 students to 60 students, and we are a pretty small institution, but we're able to kind of rotate the students in and out. And they're usually assigned different times, and so that helps us be able to kind of spread the students out. But they physically walk from campus to the archives, which really is only about like 7 blocks. It's not that bad. So that, of course, is under non-COVID times, and they come and they are able to access secondary sources and primary sources. And we assist them with understanding, how to find the materials, how to decipher the materials, because often they may or may not have ever even handled historic records before. And so it's really not about, so Chuck takes care of the actual project part, as far as the writing, what the students need to accomplish. And we help guide them through accessing the materials at the archives and helping them understand exactly how to decipher historic records, and maybe what they mean. What exactly is this record? We get a lot of times. So that is a large part of what we do in helping the students while they're actually at the physical archives. Now, because everything has gone virtual, we have not been as hands-on with each student individually, but we were much more involved in getting things put online. So as of right now, for example, many of them are at home accessing these records virtually, and that's been helpful. So he's had to kind of tailor the project, and he can maybe mention a little bit more about that, but at least he was able to utilize those online resources to still have the students access primary sources. And so that's kind of our end of it. The other side is that once the students are done with their projects, they are able to donate those to the library so that other researchers use those projects to perhaps maybe not be the only thing that they look at, but you never know. A student might find a piece of information that they hadn't found, and it gives them another clue. So we actually do archive the former students' projects, and that's been very helpful for other researchers. But I know that Chuck has been able to use these various projects that he's collaborated with to gain not just state recognition but national recognition, and so we've been very lucky to participate with him on these things. So I unfortunately don't have much more than that other than the slideshow than what Chuck's going to talk about. So unless somebody wants to ask me some questions.
That's a good idea. If anyone has any questions, feel free to share those now. I'm still working with Chuck to figure out a workaround. But yeah, if anyone has any questions for Mona about what she as an archivist does to support this program, feel free to type it in the Q&A box.
So I see a question about where we couldn't find anything, or have we had instances where we couldn't find anything? Yes. Um, there are times when, especially with the Tales from the Crypt project, where students are assigned specific names of individuals. Um, when it comes to people in a cemetery, sometimes you just grab names, and not everybody, of course, is equally represented in the historical record. So if a student has spent what would be like maybe a few weeks trying to dig and find and actively trying to find something, and they just can't, and they've searched, and they come to me, and I've actually tried to help them. I'll also, let Chuck know, hey, there's just nothing other than maybe like one or two things, but that's not enough to make a full paper or even a presentation out of. So he will reassign them a different name. The other great thing about that project is even if you have an individual assigned to you a name, you don't necessarily even have to stick to that particular name. So it's like if you have Bob Smith, maybe they were the brother of the mayor, and you may want to talk about their brother, as long as there's some kind of association to that name, or a political rival, so for example. So there are instances where you just can't find anything. Sometimes people, they just don't leave much of a paper trail. um, or and so we switch names, or we try to see if we can find somebody associated with that person. So yeah, great question. um, let's see. I hope I haven't missed any.
Yeah, the next one is the what type of records did you digitize for the students?
Okay, excellent, thank you, Carrie. um, So we did definitely the city minutes, and that really ranges from the 1830s up until about the early 1900s. We're working on the next set chronologically right now, but that basically covers the mid 1800s up to the turn of the century. Um, and then we also digitized, we had a couple of other things going on. We had the bicentennial of the oldest school in the state, public school in the state, which was in February 10th. So we've digitized a bunch of materials relating to Franklin Academy, the history of that school. And then we digitized a lot of records pertaining to Union Academy. because those two schools were connected. One, Franklin Academy was the white school, and Union Academy, excuse me, Union Academy was the African American school. And interestingly enough, Union Academy traditionally has dated its founding to 1877. And as I was digitizing these materials, I just kept finding like that's not right. And basically, through some effort that Chuck and I have done, some research, we're able to trace it back basically to 1865. It really started as a freedmen's school, and it was turned over eventually to the city in 1877, and that's why they were dating it from that time. But Union Academy existed as Union Academy with that name, which makes sense because it was basically operated by the Union and not the South. Um, it existed all the way back to 1865. And so we were able to digitize the student register of Union Academy, but it dated roughly the 1880s to about the 1910s. But still chock full of names, lots and lots and lots of names. And often that is just where people need some place to start with a name. But over the years, over the different academic years, you can see, people graduating. And then in the back of that particular record, there was somebody brilliantly came back in like 1902 and started updating. Okay, well, Shirley Simpson is now married and lives in, you know, Jackson or something. And so they gave like this little update on where people were. Not everybody, but a good number of people, a few roughly probably between 50 and 100 people. So that was really, really fascinating. And that's now digital online. And it really needed to be because it's in very, very bad shape. So I would not have been able to have the students physically use that item anyway. So we're glad to have that digitally available. So a lot of it's the city minutes, a lot of it's the school records, and those have been very helpful for Chuck to take those records and then basically extract names and have the students then use other online resources to take those names and kind of run from there. Um, let's see, what is another question?
Okay, so the next one is, who's your favorite character that you've seen performed in Tales and 8th of May? And what's the most interesting citizen of Columbus that you've learned about?
Ooh, that's a heavy question. um, my favorite character. This is gonna sound so kind of cheesy, but I love them all. I really do because each student is able to kind of give it their own spin. And so I never feel like I see the same presentation twice or performance twice. So each one of them, uh, now, to be fair, we do get a lot of Civil War veterans, and so you kind of start to see some things repeated a lot. So it's also fun when you see something unique or different. There was one situation, and I unfortunately don't remember the student's name. I know Chuck would remember her in an instant. But she did some research. The name she had was the father, but she found out that this particular man had had two illegitimate, basically enslaved persons as children. And she performed as one of those children. And so it was really powerful, like hearing what her take on having her father as her own owner. And so stories like that are really just, they stick with you. Um, but they're all really good. And I'm sorry, the interesting citizen of Columbus. Um, Ooh, there's a lot. We have the biggies that are like traditionally famous. Like we have Tennessee Williams, who was a playwright, if anyone is super familiar with him. He went on to write A Streetcar Named Desire, things like that. But I don't think I have any one person that I'm just like, ooh, this is my favorite person. It's more like I'm really interested in the era. So I feel like there's so many undiscovered parts of Columbus history, especially relating to post-Civil War era, because we kind of have semi-beaten the Civil War to death, so to speak. So I'm very interested in hearing more of the African American experience, post-Civil War. And a lot of these things are kind of coming more and more to light because of those court records and the city minutes really getting digitized and being put out there. I think there's just, I say it all the time, in our vault where our primary sources are stored, there are many, many dissertations just waiting to be written. I will say, I do have one person that comes to mind as a recent find that I find interesting, and that's Catherine Atkins. And Miss Atkins, we have her court case. She sued a local man, a white man, in 1856 for involuntary servitude. And she claimed that she was a free person of color from Maryland, and she brought in witnesses who confirmed, hey, I know this lady, I knew her parents, she worked for me for a little while as a free person, she has a birthmark on her ankle, all kinds of things like that. Um, and it's very reminiscent, if anyone has seen 12 Years a Slave. It's very kind of almost along those lines, only it's a Columbus example of somebody being held against their will, after the fugitive slave laws were enacted. So, unfortunately, I don't have all the details of her situation as to how she got here. Was she kidnapped? Was she duped in some form or fashion and sold south? I don't know, but what I do know is that the court case ultimately found her to be truthful, and they found in her favor. So she basically was told, hey, you're free, now leave town. So I think that's a really interesting story that still has a lot to offer any researcher who wants to kind of dig a little deeper. But Catherine Atkins really fascinates me, and what her story is. Um,
So your next question is, how are difficult to read headstones handled?
um, Difficult headstones. That's always a problem as far as like, sometimes headstones fall down, they crack, moss and other, things grow on them. But I have to say that typically the ones in Friendship Cemetery are, kept up with pretty easily, or pretty often. So those are not the problem. The problem really does stem, unfortunately, with Sandfield Cemetery, and that's the African American cemetery, because there's not really a fence around that cemetery, so cars have unfortunately hit things, which just boggles my mind why there's not a fence. But and then just the ravages of time, um, and to my knowledge, there really isn't anything done by anyone. Um, there's no active, organization that I'm aware of that comes in and like cleans them or anything. Um, so maybe somebody else is aware of that, but I have not heard that being done. So it's something that does need to be addressed, and that's a really great point. So, but unfortunately, I don't have a specific project that gets handled for that.
Okay, someone asked, curious if the students have used Ancestry.com to help in their research.
Yes, yes, they have. And so that's a great thing to bring up because Um, we have access to it through the library. So normally, ProQuest, who we buy Ancestry.com through, that company only allows for access if you're physically in the building and physically touching the library's computer, um, which I understand to a degree, but I feel has always been very limiting. And so, again, under non-COVID situations, the students would simply come in and use our computers. But obviously, when COVID hit, ProQuest started offering access to Ancestry.com remotely. So we were able to basically work it to where the students are able to go, as long as they have a library card for our system, they're able to use our library card number to go to our website, the library's website, and basically click a link, and that gets them into and type in their card number, and that gets them access from home to Ancestry.com. And that's, I mean, I can't even hardly do my job now without Ancestry.com. It's just so much faster, so much easier. And I know the students really enjoy it because it's a method that they're already familiar with, using the computer, accessing information, and having it done that way is so much faster than me, even though they do use microfilm, but it's a lot different than what it used to be when they had to rely solely on things like the census record on microfilm. It's just so much, 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 much faster. So Ancestry.com is a huge part of what they use in their project for sure, but they they don't, it's something that they're only able to use during the project. They can't, um, under normal situations, that's a paid subscription based type website. So as long as they have a library card, they're good.
Another question is, do you have any recommendations for fellow archivists interested in working with younger students? Tips on outreach, instruction, etc.
So that's where I feel blessed that I kind of walked into this where the project was already in existence. But I have definitely worked with other schools. The struggle is just, of course, as always, the students often can't leave campus. They don't have days off that they can come to a tour or come even to use the facility. So often what I'm trying to do is almost like a show and tell type thing where I'll bring some resources to their class. And that's often mainly like elementary and middle school age. It's often just a matter of reaching out to teachers. I know that once we had a lot of our materials digitized this summer, I sent an email out to the superintendent and I said, can you please disseminate this link to all these resources? Because often the parents and the teachers can't get to us, but maybe they can use these digital resources to include primary sources in their classroom. And as a result of that effort, it has led to teachers calling me and being like, can you please come out to my class? Is it possible for you to come bring some stuff to us? And that it's just kind of like a snowball effect, once they hear about it, because they're kind of off in their own little world and I'm off in my own little world. And often it's they're not going to always come to me. So I have to often be the one that kind of reaches out to them and make those contacts. But often it can really help to become good friends with the superintendent and have them help you because they will know exactly how to reach out to what teachers and what needs to be done, rather than trying to just reach one teacher. Although that's fine too. Um, and it really just kind of depends on what you want to do, like what kind of project. All different teachers are going to have different things that they're wanting to focus on, different eras, different historical focuses. And often it's just about communicating with them a lot up front and basically seeing what resources do you have that can tailor to whatever their project is. And that I haven't really utilized an online resource for that other than just my own, communication with them. But just being willing and having, leadership in your own institution that values that and allows you to go out to the schools instead of saying no, you have to be physically in our building at all times. And for some people that's really difficult because they may be a lone arranger and they may be the only one there. So does that what were there any other parts of that question I missed?
I think you covered it.
Okay.
The next question is, do you have a plan to collect African American, Black, LGBT plus, Native Americans, and any other traditionally marginalized people's papers? A codified collecting plan? If so, can you share it? If not, are you planning to create one?
I need to create one. Honestly, I do need to create one. It's sometimes it always feels like you're just trying to put out fires, and sometimes you don't have a chance to sit and plan for the future, because we immediately had to roll into, oh my gosh, COVID, how are we going to handle this? And so we've been able to kind of get past that hump, so to speak. And I do have a plan to address these things, but I don't have like a formal written out plan as far as that goes. Um, but often just knowing my community, because I've been here for a number of years, a lot of stuff is just done by word of mouth, physically getting out there and talking to people. For example, for the African American community, going to talk to pastors at different churches, you kind of have to meet them where they are. Um, the LGBTQ situation has been a little bit more difficult because of the secrecy that's often surrounding that. I know that there are a lot of great resources in Oktibbeha County, but unfortunately, we need Lowndes County. And I've reached out a few times to different individuals who I know are from within that community, but it's a matter of kind of staying on top of things because life just happens and then all of a sudden someone's moved away or somebody gets busy. And so it's a matter of just kind of like continuously chasing that lead. Because then all of a sudden we moved into trying to document the COVID experience, and then we also had the social justice marches that were taking place here in Columbus, surrounding both the Black Lives Matter and then also the removal of a Confederate statue on the front lawn of our courthouse. And the reality is I'm one of only two people that are staffed at the archives right now. And so it's just like you can't do everything. So my hope is to create like a much broader long-term plan. Right now it's just been like kind of hitting here, and it doesn't always lead to anything, but you just got to keep poking, so to speak. We've um, we have a staff member who is from the Hispanic population, and I have actually met with her, and we're coming up with a game plan to maybe do some oral histories from within the Hispanic community, because that's another minority group that I would like to try to document before, you know, either they've moved on or nobody will even, remember that there was a community here. So that one I do think because it's a staff member, I will be able to, and she actually speaks Spanish, and I think we'll be able to kind of bridge that gap and come up with some oral histories shortly. But it is something that we need to do an actual formal plan, yes.
Another question is, if a local library or archive is interested in getting something like this going in their community, do you have any advice?
Um, I mean, to me, it's all about planning. Plan as much as you can. What exactly are you trying to accomplish? Because often these individuals may not be super familiar with what an archives even is, and they may be really hesitant to share their stories. Finding somebody that they trust is critical. I've had personal challenges making inroads with the African American community in some instances because they just don't see me as one of them and they don't necessarily trust, well, what is this woman going to do with my stuff? Um, so it's about planning, definitely, trying to reach out to as many people who may be familiar, and then you can kind of start the ball rolling that way. But just really tailoring the project to a specific idea or point or goal. Because you just, again, you can't do everything, and just at least getting started somewhere is critical. And for example, like the Hispanic oral histories that I would like to collect, having my coworker, one, already speak Spanish, which helps. And then two, they're gonna trust her much quicker than they're gonna necessarily know who I am. I'm just a random stranger. So that really is helpful. And if you want, you can also reach out to other institutions. There's also listservs out there. I know SMA has, the Society of Mississippi Archivists has a listserv, and maybe you haven't done that particular project, but another institution has, and they'd be happy to, offer advice and recommendations.
Okay. Another question is, if people in or near Columbus wanted to help digitize or transcribe records, is there any way for them to get involved?
Yes, call me. We're always looking for volunteers for sure. And usually what I try to do is meet with the person or talk to the person and see what their comfort levels are as far as like, do they feel comfortable with a computer? Do they not? And then we can kind of also see what their interests are and then tailor their volunteer experience to that. Because there's nothing worse than, volunteering and just hating what you're doing, because that's not what anybody wants to do. So, um, I think at the end, I think my information may be at the end, but we can definitely include that in the, I don't know, Carrie, if you have access to my contact information. Otherwise, I can put it in the little Q&A.
I put the Columbus-Lowndes
Okay.
Public Library's phone number in the answer box for that
Okay.
question.
Awesome. So yeah, please just give me a call. And we can also tailor like um what time of year may be of interest to you if you have that, limitation. Now, I will say, when it comes to volunteering, you have to remember that it is still work, because often what happens is people, when it comes to archives, they get very uh wide-eyed and very excited, which is great. But at the end of the day, this is stuff that is work. It is not just about coming to look at old photos or becoming nostalgic and looking at old stuff. This is stuff that we are trying to get this information out to the public, and so we want these materials processed or indexed or digitized or transcribed. We're not trying to like have you know get bogged down in the nostalgia of things, if that makes sense. So sometimes we've had situations where volunteers have ghosted us because they realize, oh, you mean I actually have to like do something and I can't just look at a bunch of old pictures because my dad was in them? No. So, if you want to do that, you can come in as a researcher, that's fine. But, we certainly don't, we want volunteers who are committed, um, and able and willing to put in the time and the effort.
Another question is related to the Ancestry.com question from earlier.
Okay.
They're asking, has students ever discovered modern day descendants of the people that they are researching?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even not just through Ancestry.com. I mean, because the Tales from the Crypt project by now is in, I think it's in like its 26th year, roughly, maybe 27th. It's roughly around there. Especially around the Columbus community, people are very familiar with it. So every fall semester, people will sometimes try to find out who's being researched, or the student will try to contact a known descendant of that person. But sometimes individuals from the community will reach out to the students and be like, hey, we've got stuff that, belong to that person. Would you want to look at it? And that's really cool. I mean, it definitely gives the students a whole nother perspective of just how the impact of the person they're researching had like a long-term impact. So, yeah.
Someone also asked, are the students sharing their information on the Find a Grave site for each of the folks they are researching? It'd be so wonderful for them to include that as a bio on the site.
I think that's a really cool idea. I think that would have to be something that would be done as like a side project because I don't think that they would have the time. It's such a structured project with so many weeks that have to be devoted to various aspects of both research and writing the paper and then turning around and then creating the vignette, the little performance aspect. It's a very tight timeline that I know Chuck has to really stick to very hard. But like I said, a lot of those papers are donated here to the archives. And so, either through volunteers, that could be a project that we could do here, or, we could utilize like the college students at Mississippi University for Women. That could be something that could be done. So I think it's a great, great idea. I just don't think that the specific students doing the research will really have the time to devote to that during the actual project.
Another question, this is a follow-up to the gravestone question.
Yeah.
It says, how do you off of the tombstones and headstones? Do you do rubbings or is there another method for transcribing the information?
Well, luckily, we don't really have to do any of that. So I am certainly not an expert in any kind of headstone preservation or anything like that. That I haven't done, but we have um, bound indexes of everyone that's buried in Friendship Cemetery. And so we already have all the data, so we don't really have to like necessarily rely on that. It's really the students will go out and go to the cemetery, I think just as like the experience of it. They will go with the name that they've been assigned or the name that they picked, and they will like visually see the person in the, at the where they're buried. Um, and it just kind of helps them understand the project and understand like who it is that they're researching and all that. But we as an archives don't have to like run out and preserve the tombstones because we actually already have all that information.
And one last question is, what were the hardest research that you had to do for your project?
Um, um, I think because I'm experiencing it right now, this is the first thing that came to mind. It's just, the Union Academy history that I was mentioning earlier. Um, it really wasn't difficult to, in the sense of basically, um, we started researching it in like January, February of last year. And we were so gung ho. We were starting to gather information. And I contacted an archives down in New Orleans who has the collection of the American Missionary Association. And the AMA is the group that actually operated the school alongside the federal government. Anyway, so they have their collection down there, and I was super excited. I thought, oh, yes, yes, yes. And I contacted them, and they were like, well, you can come here and do the research. We don't research for you, which is not how we do it here, but that's fine if that's their how they do it. So I was like, all right, cool. And I talked to my director about making a trip to New Orleans, which, who can complain about that? But literally within a week, COVID hit and we closed the whole library. And I haven't been able to get down there. And so it's just very frustrating um, in that sense of not being able to actually physically look at the records, because I do feel the American Missionary Association collection is going to have much more detailed records pertaining to Union Academy pre 1877 that I would just love to get my hands on. So now it's just about a matter of being patient. But other than that, it's the struggle is always just getting access to stuff. Um, so otherwise, the rest of it is not that bad. Any other questions?
I think you have covered everything. Thank you so
Well,
much, Mona.
I
You have been a trooper, so thank you for giving us that improvised talk. I have heard from Chuck. He just shot me an email and said that he even tried to get his IT team at work to troubleshoot what was going on, and they were unable to figure it out. So what he is going to do is he is going to create a recording of his portion of the presentation. He's going to send it to me, and then I'll upload both of these videos to our YouTube channel, and I'll be sure to send that information out across the listservs that we posted the original, invitation to this talk, so that everyone will have that information and can kind of see things from Chuck's perspective as well. Um,
Well, it
it,
certainly is a very interesting project, and I apologize I couldn't talk about it more in depth. But I'm glad that everyone had such really awesome questions. So thank you for
yeah.
that.
Um, and Dee Dee Baldwin, she's kind of our web expert. She'll be posting the link to our YouTube channel, to our website, to the SMA's website, and I put our web address in the Q&A box for everyone if y'all want to grab it that way. So I just want to thank everyone for bearing with us and just kind of sticking it out and and you know, listening to Mona's talk. She did such a great job um, covering
Always on the
everything, and
fly, on the fly.
really giving us an archivist perspective on working with high school students and working on like not just a one and done project, but a project that's just ongoing for
I
several
will add
weeks.
that it's been really helpful to see a lot of these students go on and, you know, seek master's degrees. I mean, and it may not even be in anything to do specifically with history, but everything that they've learned from this project, from all the projects that Chuck does, helps them in their long-term goal. So it's really impressive.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And like I said, we'll be uploading this to our YouTube channel as well as Chuck's portion. So be on the lookout for that. We have our next table talk set up for May 21st, and it will be given by Dee Dee Baldwin from Mississippi State University. Her talk will be Against All Odds, telling the stories of the first Black legislatures in Mississippi. We will also be announcing our call for virtual table talks for our 2021-22 season. We are in the process of developing ideas for themes, so be on the lookout for that call for presenters. If you have questions about giving a virtual table talk, my contact information is on the screen, cmastley@library.mstate.edu. And if you would like to learn more about the Society of Mississippi Archivists, you can visit our website at mississippiarchivist.org. So again, Mona, thank you so much for just rolling with the punches and sticking it out with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.